Naima had finally unlocked her dream, a small but beautiful home in Nairobi, built with years of sleepless nights and double shifts. She had imagined this housewarming party 100 times in her head, friends laughing, music in the air, plates of food passing around, blessings filling the walls. But as soon as she saw her sister Amina walk in, dragging 2 heavy suitcases behind her, her stomach sank. Before Naima could even welcome her guests, her mother's voice rose above the music. "This is now Amina's home too. She and her husband will be moving in tonight." The room went quiet, gasps echoing as Naima stood frozen. Her own celebration had just turned into a trap. This wasn't the first time. Years ago, Naima had paid Amina's university fees while working 3 jobs, only for Amina to quit and run away with a reckless man. Now, with nothing to show for it, she was being forced into Naima's safe space, like history repeating itself. Her uncles nodded as though it was already settled, her mother's eyes dared her to argue, and Amina smirked as if she were taking a throne. Naima's voice trembled, "Did anyone even ask me?" The silence told her everything. No one cared. But instead of breaking, Naima's anger turned sharp and cold. That night, when everyone left, she quietly placed Amina's suitcases back outside and changed every lock in the house. By morning, the shouting at her door could be heard across the street. But Naima stood firm, handing her mother the old keys. "This home is mine. My sacrifice. My blood. And no one will take it from me again." For the first time in her life, Naima felt free. Naima had dreamed of this day for so long. The smell of food filled the air, music played softly, and friends had gathered to celebrate her hard work. Every corner of her new home felt alive with joy. She was just about to welcome her guests when her mother suddenly cleared her throat and raised her voice above the laughter. "This is now Amina's home too," she announced with pride, pointing at Naima's sister. "She and her husband will be moving in tonight." For a second, the music felt too loud, the air too heavy. People stopped talking, their eyes darting between Naima and her mother. Gasps spread across the room, and even Naima's closest friends looked shocked. Her heart thudded in her chest. This was supposed to be her day, her celebration, her moment. Instead, it had been turned into an ambush. Naima stood frozen, her smile collapsing. She looked at Amina, who stood there smugly, her 2 heavy suitcases by her feet as if everything had already been planned. Her uncles nodded in agreement, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Her mother's eyes burned into her, daring her to challenge the decision. The guests whispered, some shaking their heads, others waiting to see what Naima would do. Her voice trembled as she finally spoke. "Did anyone even ask me?" But the silence that followed cut deeper than words. No one cared about her answer. Memories crashed into Naima's mind. She remembered the nights she worked double shifts just to pay Amina's university fees. She remembered the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the times she went without food so her sister could study. And she remembered the betrayal, when Amina abandoned her studies and ran off with a man who only dragged her down. All of that effort, wasted. And now, that same sister was standing in her brand new house, ready to take it over as if it were her right. Naima's chest burned, but instead of breaking, something inside her hardened. She looked around the room at faces that had always expected her to bend, to obey, to carry the weight of everyone else's mistakes. She had been quiet for too long, and in that moment she understood that this was not just about a house. It was about her freedom, her voice, her life. If she gave in now, she would never stand again. The celebration went on around her, but Naima felt like she was no longer part of it. The music played, the guests laughed nervously, but inside she was making a decision that would change everything. Her mother could make announcements, her uncles could nod, and Amina could smirk, but Naima had the one thing none of them had, the keys. This house was hers. Her sacrifice. Her blood. And deep down, she knew no one would take it from her without a fight. Naima stood in the middle of her own living room, her heart sinking as her mother's words echoed in her ears. People smiled awkwardly, pretending everything was fine, but inside Naima felt the old wound reopen. This wasn't the first time her sacrifices were stepped on like dust. She thought back to the past, the years when she had struggled alone while everyone leaned on her. She remembered the days she worked from dawn until night, juggling 3 jobs, never allowing herself a single break. She had lived on tea and bread for weeks just so she could send money for Amina's university fees. She had believed in her sister's dreams more than her own, thinking education would save her. She told herself it was worth it, that Amina's success would make all the suffering make sense. But instead of finishing her degree, Amina had walked away without a second thought. She chose a reckless man, chasing love that turned into endless fights and wasted years. Naima had begged her to think, to go back to school, but Amina only laughed and said life was too short to be serious. And when it all fell apart, it was Naima who picked up the broken pieces, feeding her sister, clothing her, giving her money again and again. Everyone in the family watched silently, expecting Naima to keep carrying the burden because she was the strong one, the responsible one. No one ever asked how she managed to survive her own storms while lifting everyone else. Now, as she stood in her own house, the very place she had built through pain and discipline, she saw Amina's suitcases on her floor like a slap in the face. After years of freeloading, Amina was once again being handed her hard work, and the family acted like it was nothing. Her uncles nodded as though this was natural. Her mother smiled as though this was fair. Even the neighbors whispered, some pitying Naima, others waiting for her reaction. And Amina, with her smug little grin, acted like this home was her victory prize. Naima felt her stomach twist. She wanted to scream that she was tired, that she had given too much, that this wasn't love but exploitation. But instead, she stayed quiet, burying her pain under a forced smile like she had always done. She had been trained to hide it, to carry it, to pretend that everything was fine while her heart broke again and again. That night, she realized how much of her life had been stolen under the disguise of family duty. Every laugh she had faked, every time she had swallowed her words, every time she had buried her anger, it had led to this moment, where her safe haven was about to be invaded. And as she looked at her sister standing in her home like a queen returning to her palace, Naima felt something shift deep inside. For the first time, she understood that her silence had been the rope tying her down. And if she didn't cut it now, she would never be free. The room grew heavy, like all the air had been sucked out at once. Naima stood frozen in the middle of her own living room, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. Her uncles sat with folded arms, nodding along as if everything had already been decided long before this day. Their faces carried that same old look, the one that said a daughter's voice was too small to matter. Her mother's sharp eyes locked onto hers, daring her to open her mouth, daring her to argue, reminding her of all the times she had been silenced before. And Amina. Amina sat back smugly, her lips curved into a slow smile, her chin lifted like a queen who had already claimed her throne. The suitcases by her side weren't just luggage, they were weapons, proof that this was not a request but an invasion. Naima's throat tightened, but she forced the words out anyway, her voice trembling as she asked, "Did anyone even ask me?" The words cracked the silence like glass shattering, but no one moved. No one spoke. Her uncles shifted uncomfortably but kept their eyes low. Her mother's glare only grew colder, her jaw tightening, while Amina's smirk deepened as if Naima's question had been nothing but a joke. The silence was louder than any answer. It told Naima everything she needed to know. Nobody cared what she thought. Nobody cared what she wanted. The music still played faintly in the background, but it no longer sounded like celebration. It sounded like mockery. Naima looked around the room at her friends, who shifted awkwardly, unsure if they should intervene or keep quiet. Some looked at her with pity, others with shock, but not one of them spoke up. The room that was supposed to be filled with laughter and blessings now felt like a courtroom, and Naima was the only one on trial. Her chest burned as old memories rushed back, nights she had cried herself to sleep after paying bills that weren't hers, mornings she had dragged herself to work sick because she couldn't afford to stop, afternoons she had carried burdens that belonged to everyone else. And here it was again, all of them pressing down on her shoulders, deciding her life for her like she was nothing more than a servant in her own story. Her hands shook as she clenched them at her sides. She wanted to scream, to demand respect, to tell them she was done being used. But all she heard was the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second louder than the last, pressing against her chest like a weight. She realized this was the pressure cooker moment, the boiling point of all the years of silence, sacrifice, and swallowed pain. And if she didn't make a choice now, the rest of her life would belong to them. Naima stood there, her body stiff, her hands trembling, her throat tight. For a moment she thought she would collapse under the weight of it all, the guilt they wanted her to feel pressing down on her like a stone. But then, something strange happened. Instead of breaking, instead of giving in like she had always done before, Naima felt a fire rise inside her chest. It wasn't the loud kind of fire that explodes and fades. No, this one was quiet, sharp, and cold. It was the kind of rage that made her see everything with new eyes. She looked at her mother, at her uncles, at her sister, and for the first time she realized this fight was not just about a house. It was about something far bigger. This was about her life. About the years she had lost while carrying everyone else. About the choices she had been robbed of because she was always the one expected to sacrifice. It was about the freedom she had never tasted, the chance to finally live on her own terms. She understood it in that moment. If she bent now, if she let them push her again, she would never stand up for herself ever again. This house was not just walls and windows. It was proof of her sweat, her tears, her blood. And if she surrendered it, she would be surrendering herself. She thought of all the times she had been silenced, the times she had worked 3 jobs until her body gave out, the times she had paid bills that weren't hers, the times she had bitten her tongue when her heart wanted to scream. She remembered the hunger, the loneliness, the endless nights when she had whispered to herself that one day it would all be worth it. And now that, one day, had finally come, her family wanted to steal it as though it belonged to them. Naima's jaw tightened. Her heart was still racing, but she no longer felt weak. The fear that had wrapped around her chest began to fall away, replaced with something harder, stronger. She realized that they depended on her silence, on her obedience, on her guilt. They had always known she would fold under pressure, and that was why they kept pushing. But not this time. This time she would not be the quiet daughter. She would not be the woman who always said yes. She would not be the one who lost everything for the sake of peace. As she stood there, she could almost hear her own heartbeat saying, "Enough. Enough. Enough." Her rage was no longer wild, it was controlled, steady, unshakable. She knew she had to act. She knew she had to protect what was hers. Because if she didn't, she would spend the rest of her life trapped in the same cycle, carrying everyone else while no one carried her. Naima finally understood her power. And with that cold rage burning inside her, she knew she was ready to fight for herself, for the first time in her life. When the last guest left and the noise of the evening faded, the house felt heavy with tension. The music had stopped, the laughter had vanished, but the sting of her mother's announcement still hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Naima stood in her living room, staring at the empty plates and cups scattered on the table, but her mind was not on the mess. Her eyes kept drifting upstairs, where Amina had dragged her suitcases earlier, climbing the steps with the confidence of someone moving into her new kingdom. The sound of the suitcase wheels scraping against the stairs had burned into Naima's memory, each drag a reminder of how quickly her joy had been stolen. Upstairs, Amina's laughter echoed faintly as she made herself comfortable, as though the house already belonged to her. Naima sat on the edge of her couch, her hands tight around her knees, her heart pounding with quiet rage. Every corner of the house told the story of her sacrifice, the tiles she had saved for months to buy, the furniture she had carried home in pieces, the walls she had painted herself after long shifts at work. And now, her sister had simply walked in, ready to claim it without lifting a finger. The house was silent by midnight. Amina was sleeping in one of the bedrooms, and the world outside was dark and still. That was when Naima made her choice. Her body shook, but her decision was firm. Slowly, she climbed the stairs, her feet light against the floor. She found the suitcases, sitting there like they had grown roots in her home. For a long moment, she just stared at them, her breath shallow, her mind racing. Then, with trembling hands, she began to pull them back down the stairs, one step at a time. The weight was heavy, but Naima's resolve was heavier. The night air was cool when she opened the front door. She placed both suitcases outside on the porch, her chest rising and falling with each breath. She stood there, looking at them under the faint glow of the streetlight, and for the first time that night, she felt a flicker of relief. She wasn't done yet, but this was the first step. She closed the door quietly, locking it behind her. And then she reached for the small box of tools she had bought months ago, never thinking she would use them for this. Her hands trembled, her throat felt dry, but her spirit was steady. One by one, she changed every lock in the house, front door, back door, even the gate. With each turn of the screwdriver, she felt her fear loosening and her strength returning. By the time she was done, the sun was beginning to rise. Naima sat on the floor, exhausted but unbroken, the new keys cold and firm in her hand. This was her house, her sacrifice, her freedom. And tonight, she had taken it back. Morning did not arrive softly. It came with thunder at the door. Naima woke to the sound of fists pounding hard against the wood, each bang shaking the frame of her house. Her mother's voice cut through the quiet, sharp and furious. "Open this door, Naima. How dare you embarrass us like this?" Behind her, Amina's cries rang out like sirens. "You're heartless. How could you do this to your own sister? You've betrayed your family." The shouting grew louder, mixed with whispers and gasps from neighbors who had stopped on the street to watch the drama unfold. Curtains shifted in nearby houses, and eyes peered through gates. Everyone wanted to see the storm inside Naima's home spill into the open. Naima sat still for a moment, holding the new keys in her hand. They felt heavy, not just of metal, but of meaning. She could hear her heart pounding, fear trying to creep back in, guilt trying to crawl over her resolve. But then she remembered the years of sacrifice, the nights she had gone hungry, the endless days of being treated like a servant in her own life. She thought of her sister smirking in her living room the night before, already acting like the house was hers. The cold rage inside her did not fade. Instead, it gave her strength. She stood, her bare feet brushing against the cool floor, and walked slowly to the door. The banging grew harder. Her mother's voice grew sharper. Amina's wails turned into threats. Naima's hands trembled, but not with weakness, this time, it was with power. She unlocked the door just enough to crack it open. The sunlight streamed in, blinding for a moment, revealing her mother's furious face and Amina's tear-streaked one. The neighbors stood close by, pretending not to stare, but their curiosity painted the air thick. Without raising her voice, Naima held out her palm. Resting on it were the old keys, the ones she had changed in the dark of night. She looked her mother in the eyes, her voice low but steady, sharper than any scream could ever be. "This home is mine. My sacrifice. My blood. And no one will take it from me again." The words carried more weight than all the shouting outside. For a second, even the banging stopped, even the neighbors went quiet. Then, before anyone could reply, Naima shut the door. The lock clicked, final and strong. She leaned her back against the door as their shouting started again, echoing outside like a storm she no longer had to weather. The walls of her home absorbed the noise, but inside it was calm, quiet, hers. For the first time, she felt the true meaning of ownership. Not just of the house, but of her life. She held the new keys tight in her hand and let out a deep breath. The voices outside would eventually fade, but her stand, her decision, would stay forever. Naima had drawn the line, and this time, she would not step back. Word spread faster than fire through dry grass. By afternoon, almost everyone in the neighborhood had heard the story. People whispered at shop counters, discussed it at the market, and even children repeated the tale while playing on the dusty roads. Naima, the quiet daughter who had always bowed her head, who had always been the one to carry other people's burdens, had finally said no. She had drawn her line in stone, and she had not moved. Some neighbors called her brave, others called her cold, but one thing was clear: Naima was no longer the same woman they thought they knew. That night, the street outside was quiet, the drama of the morning slowly fading. Inside her small but beautiful home, Naima sat alone in her living room. The dishes from the party had been cleared, the floors swept clean, but the silence felt new, different. It was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of peace. In her hands, she held the new keys, the ones she had changed with her trembling hands the night before. She turned them over gently, listening to the soft jingle that now sounded like music. They were not just keys to a house. They were the keys to her freedom, the proof that she had taken control of her life at last. She poured herself a cup of tea and leaned back in her chair, the steam rising softly into the air. For years she had dreamed of moments like this but had never allowed herself to believe they could be real. Her sacrifices had always been swallowed by others, her voice drowned out, her needs ignored. But tonight was different. Tonight she was not smiling because she owned the house. She was smiling because, for the first time in her life, she owned herself. Naima closed her eyes for a moment and let the warmth of the tea spread through her. Outside, life went on as usual, but inside her heart, something had shifted forever. She no longer felt small. She no longer felt voiceless. She was not just the quiet daughter anymore. She was a woman who had stood up, who had fought back, who had chosen herself. And that choice, more than the walls around her or the roof above her head, was the true beginning of her freedom. For the first time in years, Naima's smile was real. Not because she had a house, but because she finally had power.